Now, Israel's conflict with Iran is expected to jump to the top of the agenda at today's G7 meeting in Canada. President Trump arrived in the Canadian Rockies yesterday amid a whole host of political and economic issues that will keep world leaders busy over the next 2 days. NBC News senior White House correspondent Gabe Gutierrez joins us now from Calgary, Canada. So, Gabe, let's start with the Middle East. As Israel's staunchest ally, is the president expected to face any added pressure from the other G7 leaders to try and de-escalate what's happening?
Certainly, as you mentioned, Joe, this topic will be a huge part of the conversation here at the G7, which will also see other issues rise to the surface as well, including the war in Ukraine and also the ongoing trade war really across the world. But that issue of Israel and Iran, certainly world leaders, including the German chancellor, have said that they plan to ask the United States to try and de-escalate this situation. But there's broad agreement that Iran cannot get a nuclear weapon. So we expect the president to face difficult questions about that. And this is actually the first time, the first world leader summit that President Trump has gone to in 6 years. Of course, the previous G7 summit here in Canada in 2018 produced that now very memorable photo of President Trump going against other world leaders, the German chancellor at the time, Angela Merkel, standing over him. And the leaders did not have much agreement at all in that summit back in 2018, and Trump basically stormed off. So a lot of issues at the table here, but looming large over this gathering will be the Israel-Iran conflict, Joe.
And another, of course, major issue is going to be the economy, the global economy. How much do we expect the president to see pushback from other G7 leaders when it comes to his trade tariffs, which have dominated the world economy over the past few months?
Well, certainly, and many of these issues are interconnected, right? I mentioned the war in Ukraine. Several of these European countries will make the argument that they can't be expected to increase their defense spending, which President Trump has been very insistent on, that they can't do that if they're expected to fight this ongoing trade war. So certainly the tariffs against Canada have been on pause until July 9th, but President Trump is facing increasing pressure to announce new trade deals. We really haven't heard much of anything given the self-imposed deadline that the United States put forward. So far, we've only heard of frameworks of deals with Great Britain and China, but really not much else. So there will certainly be a lot of questions as this summit gets underway, whether there can be any sort of agreement to stave off a broader trade war and to have any agreement with these countries that are the world's biggest economies, Joe.
Also notable, Gabe, is where you are. This is the president's first visit to Canada since relations with the U.S. deteriorated over those repeated comments about trying to make Canada the 51st state, not to mention the tariffs. So what can we expect when the president meets with Canada's prime minister later today?
Yeah, it's certainly the elephant in the room, is it not, Joe? Look, several weeks ago, when Mark Carney was in the United States, I asked the president in the Oval Office whether he was joking with all this talk of the 51st state. He did not back off of it. He even said never say never when it came to Canada potentially becoming the 51st state. Of course, Mark Carney in the room right there pushed back gently. And so we do expect there to be some gentle pushback to that. But Mark Carney so far has proved very adept as not escalating any conflict with President Trump. So during the bilateral meeting later today, we expect it should be interesting to see how it ends up. But Carney not expected to make any huge conflict with the president, again, with so many issues looming large over the summit. And they're trying to strike a trade deal when it comes to tariffs.
Yeah, you can always pivot to any number of issues. All right, Gabe Gutierrez, good to have you with us. Thank you.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.